So I've been bullet journaling for the past 5 years. I started in February of 2017, and 9 notebooks later, I feel like I've finally gotten a grasp on the system and what really works for me. And I feel like I've also learned a lot on the way. And I want to share those things that I've learned with you today and talk about 5 things that I wish I had told myself or I had known when I first started bullet journaling. So without further ado, let's get into the things that I wish I knew. The first thing I wish I'd known when I started bullet journaling is that your bullet journal does not need to be solely a productivity tool for it to work well for you. For a really long time, I just thought my bullet journal was a planner. It recorded my appointments, my task list, and all of my notes. And while that worked, and while that was helpful, I feel like for so many years I missed out on the true purpose of my journal, and I really didn't dig deep into why my journal helped me, so I wasn't able to really dig into spreads and customize it to be the best version for me. It wasn't until a couple months ago that I actually sat down and asked myself, why is it a helpful productivity tool? What kind of bigger purpose is it serving? And that's when I realized that the true purpose of my bullet journal isn't for productivity, it's actually for mindfulness and self-care. And being a productivity tool was kind of a conduit for actually achieving those two things. So even from the start, something I wish I'd done is really thought critically about the overarching purpose of my journal and what overall I wanted it to achieve. And then from there, then breaking it down into those smaller functions and those smaller purposes that feed into that larger purpose. And kind of along that line, I would have recommended to my original new bullet journal self not to be afraid to use my journal for different purposes, because it wasn't until I expanded my journal into being not only a productivity tool, but also being used for mindfulness and memory keeping that I really got the most out of my journal. Because at the end of the day, it's those unique combinations and different purposes that are going to make your journal unique for you and work the best possible for you. So that is the first tip. Don't just use your bullet journal for productivity, unless maybe that's your only purpose. And then, hey man, look, you already figured it out. Good job. I wasn't there until this year. All right, tip number 2. Your bullet journal doesn't have to do everything. When I first started bullet journaling, I thought that everything in my life had to be squeezed into one notebook. And while you can do that with the bullet journal, for me and for my highly overwhelmed, easily mind, that was not the way to go. That was not the way to do it. No. Something I realized along my bullet journal journey, if you will, is that your bullet journal and a notebook won't be an effective way to store every single piece of information. You know, for me, recipes I don't store in my bullet journal because then I'd have multiple notebooks with all my recipes, which would make it really hard to find a certain recipe I was looking for. So instead, I realized that that isn't a useful piece of information to store in my bullet journal, and now I keep all my recipes in a recipe box in my kitchen. So all that information is stored in one place, and that works really well for me. But that doesn't mean my bullet journal works less well because I don't keep every single aspect of my life in it. So from the start, I would have recommended to my bullet journal newbie self to set boundaries on what information you store in your bullet journal and what information you don't store in your bullet journal. And bonus tip, you could definitely connect the information you store versus the information you don't store to your purpose and kind of figure out what things you want to keep in here based on why you use your journal. Also, I think as a beginner, once I'd gotten used to the system, something that would have really helped me would be to not be afraid to experiment mixing digital and analog tools together. For me now, I actually use an iCalendar in conjunction with my bullet journal as well as my notes app, which I store a lot of notes in. And I find by mixing the digital with the analog, I'm able to really store my information in the best way for each information type. And all my systems just kind of work better that way because I'm not forcing information into a storage mechanism that doesn't work well for it. Tip 3, you do not, I repeat, don't do this, create your monthly, yearly, and weekly setups in one sitting. You can, and if it happens, that's great. Yearly setups, especially for those of us who do like to create a lot of collections, I being one of them, they can take a bit of time. And you deserve to take the time to enjoy your setup and to enjoy the process and not make it this rushed, stressful, unenjoyable thing, because I believe then you're carrying all that negative energy into your journal and you're creating a negative experience with it from the start, which I don't think is the best way to start a new year with a new notebook. And I did this for many years. I would pressure myself to sit down and do all my setups in one sitting. And I guess I did it because I thought that was the way it was supposed to be done, or that if I had to take time to do my setup in multiple sittings, I was spending too much time on my journal and then it wasn't a proper bullet journal. And all those thoughts didn't really help me out, because at the end of the day, the best thing to do is to just make your journal practice as calm and enjoyable as possible. And that is something I wish I'd known when I first started. So from the beginning, allow yourself time to think and plan your new setup, and allow yourself time to actually sit down and enjoy making your spreads. You're making spreads, I hope, because you enjoy the customizable aspect of the journal. So why not make it a fun, enjoyable process while you're doing it? I guess what I'm trying to say is, at the end of the day, your journal is for you, so you deserve to take time to think about what you want in it and take time to actually enjoy setting it up. And don't forget that, journaling is supposed to be fun. At least I think it is. It doesn't need to be super serious, and you don't need to be super harsh and disciplined on yourself about making your setup happen in one sitting. The next thing I wish I'd known is that your journal will be unique to you. So there's no need to worry about it looking different from everyone else's. Something that took me a while to do that I'm glad I now understand how to do is understanding how to appreciate someone's journal and how they journal, while also realizing that it's not something that I want to do in my journal because it's just not realistic for me and it probably just won't work with my practice. For a really long time when I started journaling, I'd get really distracted by other people's journals on Instagram, and I'd often get really discouraged when I'd see all their beautifully decorated spreads and wonder why my bullet journal couldn't be like that. Because for me, every time I try to sit down and paint or draw in my journal, I just found it really unrealistic, and I'd get overwhelmed and burnt out and want to quit bullet journaling, and all that stuff just didn't work for me. But I loved how other people's journals worked, and it really frustrated me that my journal couldn't be like theirs. So instead, from the start, I wish I'd realized that it's not about your journal looking like someone else's, it's about it being unique to you. And from the start, listen to what sparks joy and is something you enjoy in your own journal, and start to understand that you can appreciate something in someone else's notebook while realizing that it's not realistic to do in your own journal, and that's okay. But if you feel it's having an effect, don't worry, I was there for a period of time. And once you kind of focus on what you like, it's easier to not listen as much to what other people are doing because you're listening instead to yourself. The next and last thing I wish I'd known as a beginner is that you can still have a functional journal that looks nice without doing art in it. So to preface this, as you'll be noticing in the journals I've been flipping through during this video, I do very simple, minimal bullet journaling. And for a lot of my bullet journal journey, I kind of felt insecure about the fact that I did more minimal spreads because I felt like they weren't, as nice to look at as more artistic journals. I kind of had this notion that if you do a minimalist setup, it's not really meant to be artistic or beautiful or nice to look at, because that goes against the minimalist perspective and the minimalist idea of doing things. And something I realized is that you can totally have a minimal, simple journal that is still a unique creative expression of yourself and is still something really nice to look at and something that is, sure, why not, aesthetically pleasing, if you will. So something I'd tell myself as a beginner is, it is important to appreciate and be happy with how your journal looks, but it's also important to remember that there are a bunch of different ways to get creative in your journal outside of drawing and painting that will make you like how it looks. And you can still get creative and express your personal style through your journal, no matter how simple or decorative you make it. In my own experience, I found the most satisfaction with my own bullet journal once I realized that, firstly, I did not enjoy painting or drawing in my journal, but also that there were other ways to still make my journal look nice that didn't compromise on my enjoyment factor. So if I could go back in time and talk to my new bullet journal self, I would remind her to remember that while liking how your journal looks is important, the content of the pages and the memories kept in them tend to be a lot more valuable over time. But also, don't be afraid to spend time making it look how you want it to look. And those were the 5 things that I wish I'd known when I first started bullet journaling. I hope that if there's any bullet journal noobs out there, that maybe these tips were helpful for you and something that you needed to hear in your own personal journaling journey, if you will. And maybe leave a comment down below if you bullet journal, something that you wish you'd known as a beginner, so we can all share as much collective insight as we can for each other. And besides that, I will see you guys in another video next week. So hope you are all doing well and have a nice week until then. Bye everyone.